विदेशी महाविद्यालयों में एडमिशन पाने के नुस्खे.
What's vidyalo mein? I know, what's vidyalo?
No. विदेशी.
Is that country or some shit?
विदेश.
What?
मैं विदेश जा रहा हूँ.
I'm going back to my country or?
So very good evening to all the viewers watching. जैसे कि आप देख रहे हैं कि आज हमने चश्मे वश्मे चढ़ा लिए हैं. वो उसका कारण ये है कि आज का एपिसोड थोड़ा पढ़ाकू टाइप एपिसोड है, तो स्कूल के कुछ कॉलेज के बचपन के दिन याद आ गए हैं. And with the two guests who have very generously agreed to join us from thousands of miles away, so I will hand it over to them to introduce themselves so that we can begin with the episode. Guys, over to you.
Hi everyone, my name is Sakhi. We live in San Francisco right now. We went to Wharton for our MBA, and that's where we met and got married recently. So that's what happens when you go to business school sometimes. I currently work at a startup focused on building self-driving cars called Zoox. I'm on the partnerships team there and have been working there for almost 3 years now.
Pleasure to meet everyone. My name is Amit, Jayakar. I'm currently the vice president of a healthcare startup in the AI space. Prior to business school, I spent several years working in private equity and healthcare.
Fantastic. That ये होता है बिजनेस स्कूल की पढ़ाई करने से. You know exactly how to present yourself, जो कि हमें बिल्कुल नहीं आता है. The first question, in fact, since both of you have gone to extremely prestigious Ivy League business schools, the first question comes around that. What is it about an Ivy League school across categories, not necessarily, let's say, business, but any Ivy League school for that matter, that makes it so prestigious?
Yes, at least my opinion of the most important aspect of going to a good school, specifically an Ivy League school, is I believe everyone's a function of their environment. So whether it's your 5 closest friends or 5 closest professors, the best way to actually learn is often from kind of the community around you. So independent of maybe 1 or 2 classes being, very strong in a particular program you're interested in, it's the quality of the individuals that's in the same class as you, or in the same dormitory, or in the same apartment building as you. I think that's really what makes it special, because not only do you learn from the people in your class, but then outside of that, if you're thinking about what to pursue academically, what to pursue professionally, or even for hobbies here and there, you find people that are very driven, and that drive forces you to actually try to push yourself.
And to add to that, I don't think, it's happened over time that a school like Wharton or Stanford or any of these big Ivy schools have made such a big reputation and gained prestige. And it's a function of the graduating students and what they've gone ahead and done in life. Like somehow it gets attached to the pedigree. Like someone becomes a CEO of Google or Facebook or some of these big companies out there, and you look at their resume and you're like, hey, I see some really good education here that they have. And while they were in those schools, the alumni today, which has done very well, it's also like the teachers that we had and the professors that these schools have. They're very high quality individuals. And honestly, like I've been lucky enough where when I turned around last year at some point to reach out to one of my professors for a question, the response was fairly quick. So they keep in touch with the alumni network to help them keep growing. And I think that system as a whole is what makes the institute as prestigious as it is, and the students graduating from that school successful.
Just to kind of add one more detail to the comments that came in about prestige. This isn't for every single business school, but if you go to a select group of business schools for your MBA, whether it be Wharton or Stanford or Kellogg for that matter, going there and graduating in of itself is enough of a stamp to the point where there's actually grade non-disclosure. So employers are actually not allowed to ask for your grades while you're in business school. Whether you got A's or B's or C's or D's, all of that is independent of the fact that you graduated. And the reason that's actually allowed is because the administrators at those organizations, such as at Wharton or Harvard, have effectively signaled to the market that we have let these people in, we trust they will work hard, and we trust that they are smart. You should trust us for that matter.
Now, trying to narrow it down to an Indian context, this world of Ivy League schools from India, far away, looks extremely intimidating, comes across like an exclusive little circle, which is extremely hard to, get into, which I'm sure it is, but not as hard as most of us, sometimes think. So the question kind of comes from that. What are some of the first steps that someone sitting in India, can take, to seek admission into one of these premier institutions?
I have a few comments about that.
And you have to answer it from an Indian perspective.
That's fine. I think from a young age, if you're 21, 22, and you have some time between that and starting a job, whatever it might be, I recommend that people take their GMATs when they can. Your GMAT scores will sit for 5 years. So you don't have to take the GMAT and then immediately apply. You can take it when you're 22 and waiting for your job to start 2 months later, because frankly, you're probably a lot more available at that point than you will be 4 years from now when you start considering business school or you want to suddenly apply and you don't have the time to balance work, family, and studying.
Yeah. And when you're 26, 27, considering that, hey, or whatever age you're at, considering I want to go to business school and you're working full time, it takes a toll on you to just but also you've not studied in so many years. You've not picked up a book, right? Versus right after graduating from college, you're still in that frame of mind of giving exams and being good at that. So take that time and use it wisely, because as Amit mentioned, these scores last for 5 years. And let's say you give your GMAT when you're 21 or 22, 5 years is a decent amount of time after that to even gain work experience and then enter to a B school of some sort. So use that. One other thing is that a lot of business schools accept GRE also. Unfortunately, GRE scores don't last as long as GMAT scores. I think GRE scores last for either 2 to 3 years at best, and then you have to retake it. Or maybe I'm wrong. They also last for 5 years. Yeah. Well, if they last for 5 years, the advantage of doing GRE is you may not know exactly at 21 whether you want to do an MBA or whether you want to do another master's program. Most master's programs take GRE versus the GMAT. So maybe taking the GRE is actually beneficial because it gives you the optionality later on to decide what kind of master's programs that you want to do. So I think that's a really good first step.
Great. So I think one point that I want both of you guys to throw some light on is that, when you were discussing this the other day, you said that not every school, not every business school for that matter also caters or offers the same kind of courses. So how important is profiling of schools while you're in your graduation?
I think that is, it's important to understand that because obviously if you are going to go to a business school, your goal at the end of that is likely, either to do something professional, like you have some idea of what you'd like to do professionally. People go to business school to switch careers, industries, functions, be an entrepreneur, start something completely different, like various reasons, right? And so I don't think it's necessarily important to start understanding these schools at the age of 21, 22. That is something that is something you should do closer to when you're actually writing your application, your essays. Also, because you're spending money to go to these schools. You're going really far away from home to do that, taking like 2 years of your life to get this new degree. You should be as prepared as possible and like knowing full well what you're getting into. But it also shows in your application if you've done that kind of research, which, like the admissions team always likes to see.
I would say it's more a function of what you're trying to do for yourself versus what you're trying to do for the university. You could say as a 22-year-old that Stanford has a mild preference for entrepreneurs, or MIT Sloan has a mild preference for engineers. I disagree with that generalization, but let's say that were to be the case in terms of the data for admitted students. That doesn't mean you should dictate the next 5 years of your career just to hone your application specifically for one university. Based on what you want to do from a business school program when you are 25 or 26, and if at that point you decide you're ready for business school, then you find the school that most appropriately matches what you want to do and based on what you've already done. It should be
a fit.
It should be personally driven, not universally driven. Yeah. Because in the end, a lot of the differences of these major business schools, whether it be it's MIT or Stanford, the differences are on the margin, meaning that it's not like MIT will disproportionately only take engineers because it is an engineering school. That's not the case. You could easily come from a traditional finance background and have no technical understanding and still be a very good fit for MIT because you have a good story for why you want to get a business education and why a specific program at MIT might be good for you.
Okay,
interesting.
So, but you guys, from your experience and from the kind of people that you interacted with that were your classmates or were your seniors or the alumni of your school, so to speak, do you think you have to necessarily be like an academic genius to be able to get into these schools? Like you have to be an A grader through and through?
No.
I think you need to be hardworking. Like when you say through and through, so high school, like I don't think you don't necessarily have to be like a A grader, top 110%, top 1 to 5% in your high school. Your life could completely change once you start working and you excel at your workplace, and that's what like a lot of your application will reflect. It doesn't talk about what you did in high school as much as it does talk about what you did in while you were working the last XYZ years of your life. When I was doing my applications, there was this pie chart that like my admissions counselor drew out where she was just like 50% of your, like the way your application is being judged is like 50% of it is
I was always told 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, and then it fluctuates depending on the university.
Fair. So like there were 3 main criteria, right? Work experience, GMAT score, and what was the third?
Story.
Yeah. So your essay basically.
Yeah, which is incredibly important, and people sometimes look at their application as a function of, do I have this pedigreed undergrad university, and do I have a 770 GMAT? That's not the case, because you're forgetting a huge portion of it is your story, which is how well you can communicate why you are a strong candidate on paper as you submit it to them.
Yeah.
And every university has a different question. You might think it's the same style of question, but they all have fairly different nuances and why you should tailor it specifically to that university.
Okay, so the story that you spoke about, Amit, so how does an Indian candidate, so to speak, go about creating that unique profile? Or what is the correct way of putting across your story to any XYZ Ivy League college?
So when I think of a story, it's somewhat incredibly personal and it's somewhat incredibly formulaic. It's this interesting dichotomy where it's formulaic in the sense that the university expects you to hit a few main points, such as like you gave a background about yourself or you talked about your work experience and why it's relevant. But in the end, they don't want to read the same 1,000 applications. And even if you went to Delhi University and then did engineering afterwards and then applied, you are still a very different applicant than someone else who also has that similar paper profile And the way you could do that is through your story. It can get very personal. For example, in my application, at least in the US, it's very common for Indian Americans to have a finance background, whether it be in investment banking or private equity. So going in and applying to a lot of these Ivy League schools, you don't really stand out if you just said, I worked at a prestigious financial firm and I'm smart. That's not enough. You have to have some personality to it. And this is where you have to break the mold that a lot of consultants might typically give you. You want to follow the framework, but the content you add to it has to be very personal. For example, I integrated a lot of my personal interests in chess and how I used to be a national level chess player growing up and how that's influenced the way I think of the world, or my interest in certain industries. Personally, I really love healthcare. It doesn't have to be something as specific as what I'm talking about, but it has to at least be personal.
Yeah. I did something similar. Like I used my story as a Kathak dancer to weave into answering one of the questions about describing myself to my classmates. And like I knew that the school I was applying to, has certain like values that they like their students to exhibit in their application or see, like leadership, communication, like the classic teamwork, things like that. And so I used Kathak as my story and how like 14 years of practicing that has helped me be a better leader, a better team player, a better like communicator, and just like elements of that. So that helped me stand out in that essay.
And I think the Indian education system also is not very flexible when it comes to an individual wanting to express himself or herself at an early age. So suddenly for someone to, for us to expect that someone who's applying for these universities abroad will be able to kind of suddenly own up and embrace his or her story will be slightly too much to ask for. But maybe, and this is an offshoot of this itself, that do you think, now it's a technical question again, getting a counselor for this whole process helps one in understanding one's own story, or how does a counselor come in and maybe help you in the process?
I personally, like, I had a admissions counselor and I thought that was very helpful. Like some context over here is that, so I went to a CBSE K through 12 school, and like I, at least in that like high school education, had never written a real essay because that was never a requirement. Like we had this tiny English like class.
Exactly what I'm saying.
Yeah. I remember I went to undergrad. I went to London for undergrad, and even in my first like semester there, I basically did so poorly on writing an essay because I didn't know that Google Scholar was a thing. I used like Wikipedia and businessdictionary.com as like the resources. And like I was basically shamed in front of 250 of my classmates for doing that. But I didn't know enough. And I learned through those 3 years, of course, in undergrad on like how to write better. I personally don't think it's easy to draft a resume because you don't necessarily love like writing good things about yourself, your key achievements. Like here's a document, and like there were small things like my counselor was just like, oh no, your resume must not be longer than 1 page. Those small things that like I would not have realized initially as I was just applying myself and looking at the application requirements. Some of these counselors have gone through like a wealth of experience where like students that they worked with have received like admissions at great universities. So obviously they go for conferences and interact with the admissions counselors, etc. at these schools. So they have some idea, but I think it's at the same time, it's very important to make sure that you and your counselor work very closely together so that you're not drafting out, the counselor is not just using another template for you and your application. Your story is unique and that should shine through. And most experienced counselors would do that.
Yeah, the point of the counselor should be how to be strategic and how to follow a framework. But it cannot be a cookie cutter, same framework that everyone is applying to. It has to be personal. make sure when you're finding a counselor, when you're doing your diligence to know if they are actually a good counselor, see how well they know the culture or the personality of each university. So if you're applying to Columbia as a university is an incredibly strong institution, but they have a very small ego. They're always worried that people are going to apply to Columbia, but also apply to Wharton and Harvard and go there instead. So you have to push in your application to Columbia why you absolutely love New York or why you absolutely love a specific professor at Columbia that is unique to what they can offer that their competitors cannot.
Yeah.
And that's just one example of what a counselor should guide you towards.
Yeah.
If they don't know those level of details, find someone else.
Across as an eye-opener for a lot of students, because in India, how most students and parents also for that matter look at counselors, I think is just someone with factual information and not contributive, collaborative, strategic potential to kind of work together with the applicant. But I think this should help.
You know, the thing with the issue is that these the counselors which focus on business school, it's not like small money. And what happens is that when parents or students are investing that money in a counselor that they find, they're hoping that if I'm spending, I don't know, 60,000 rupees or a lakh or whatever that money is, depending on counselor to counselor, you're like, I want like almost like a guarantee that I will get in, right? You're looking for that return. But no counselor, you cannot guarantee that. You're not the one assessing the application. And I think that's what gets challenging. And sometimes it's a little bit of like being penny wise, pound foolish, because you're hoping to get into a business school where you will be spending like lots of money on that education. But you're worried about that initial investment and that hiccup that you may have to do because, of course, there's no guarantee. And you end up going with like maybe a counselor like Amit mentioned, who's not that involved with the nitty-gritties of things, who doesn't know these small details that you can add to your application that'll make you stand out. And so there is an associated financial hurdle. And I think that if you are looking at investing a lot of money going to this and doing this business school education, you should get past that hurdle that, hey, these counselors are expensive, I might as well just get a really good one versus settling for someone who may not be as experienced.
And I think it's actually I'm so glad that they both brought up certain words in the previous answer: money, business, strategy, upfront costs, return on investments, because I think foreign education, the difference in costs is largely one of the reasons for a lot of parents to even not think of applying or allowing their children to apply to any kind of school sometimes. But I want to understand from a financial perspective, and purely from a financial perspective, in possibly two buckets of answers. How does a parent how does a couple prepare for a education of that value in terms of money, and for a child who's seeking admission, for a young individual professional who's seeking admission, what should his or her understanding of the financial implications of such an education be?
So I have two thoughts on that. One is, if you're going to be spending in dollars, pounds, euros, whatever it might be for your master's, not all universities are treated equally. So if you're going to be committing, so if you go to the UK or if you go to the US, a lot of these institutions, after 2 years, with room, board, food, tuition, you'll end up spending roughly $200,000, maybe 1.5 crores. Just given exchange rates. So quite a lot.
Just on the higher side, by the way.
But you could spend anywhere from 1 to 1.5 fairly easily at some of these institutions. If you're going to do that, make sure you go to a place that is quote unquote worth it. Not all US business schools are treated equally. You can go to University of Miami, which is where I'm from, and get your MBA there and still spend the exact same amount as if you went to Harvard. At that point, don't do that. The reason being is you're making a large commitment both from an opportunity cost and from a financial cost to go to get your MBA. The opportunity cost is what you could have done in those 2 years. The actual cost is that 200,000 or that 1 crore that you're spending to go there. If you're spending that much, it should be at an institution where you think you can recoup that money fairly comfortably afterward. So if that's through starting a business that you think that has a great prospect, or whether if you want to work in Dubai or in New York or in San Francisco afterwards, where you'll be able to earn in a currency that would pay back that tuition after taking out a loan, those are some of the main options. But you have to be willing to understand kind of what your 5-year plan is after you get your MBA to see whether it was worth kind of that 2-year process. If you find that you don't have the willingness to take on $200,000 of debt, which is a lot of money, then I think you're better off not going all the way to the US for your education, but rather finding an institution that's more affordable and perhaps even closer to home.
The biggest pro tip is a lot of MBA schools offer STEM degrees. What that means is, so when you come to the US at least, and I can talk for US, I don't know about like Europe or UK, but as an international, when you come to the US for an MBA, some or masters, some of these programs have majors which are categorized into the STEM section.
Science, technology, engineering, math.
Yeah. So Wharton, for example, had a business analytics major. I did a double major. I did a marketing ops major and a business analytics major. And doing that business analytics major gave me the ability to stay in the country for 3 years, because
at a minimum.
At a minimum, it gave me that like for sure. Like it's like almost like a guarantee that if I have a job, if I graduate, I have 3 years that I can stay, because there's this thing over here in terms of immigration called H-1B, which is the visa you will apply for to be able to actually work here. But it's based on a lottery system. And so to give you guys context, I applied 3 times for that H-1B, and this year was the first time, and this was my last attempt that I did get that lottery. And
so,
even
sorry to cut you short, Sakhi. One very important tip here that I want you to put across is that, was any of this strategized before you flew or you shifted shores, or was it a slow discovery after you reached here?
So I actually didn't know about the STEM major, and I felt very fortunate that I learned about it later. So in my case, I was like, I got into Wharton. That's a big enough thing. I'm just going to go and figure life out. But I think the schools are now becoming a little bit more vocal about these things. So as an Indian student, I would make that extra effort to look at schools that offer like STEM programs, just if ROI is a big consideration for you.
So we've discussed the whole technical and the whole sort of financial side of this, but are there any other soft skills, or how important are extracurriculars? Basically, what I'm trying to ask is, what is it except for financial planning and all these things, all these technical things that, you know, young parents of today or an XYZ parent can start inculcating in their child, you know, in their formative years?
So Indian parents, or like Asian parents in general, tend to be pretty hard taskmasters. Like that's the reputation they have. At least, so like, I mean, or we've all gone through parts and phases of it where, like, you know, there are certain metrics that they all want us to achieve. And of course, in India, there's always been a very big focus on, like, academically, you must be very sound. Like, you know, the minute like exam time comes, a lot of parents often halt every extracurricular because the focus is to study for those exams. But I think one suggestion that I would give to parents is, like, it's important to recognize that extracurriculars also help in the development and growth of a young student and child, and to not pause those things in the middle. Let the child continue growing. So as a personal example, like, dancing was my main extracurricular growing up, be it like Kathak or I used to do street jazz. Every time like my exam time would come, I would end up pausing my classes. And the problem was that I was basically like, if I were to think about the skills I was gaining from those group classes that I went for, I was learning how to work with a lot of other people, right? I was sometimes taking leadership while I was teaching choreography to others. Was basically like, it was an area for me for like to basically do some self-expression. So there's a lot of like softer skills that I'm learning through
Also
just being
confident.
and of course my confidence, like if I'm ever in the front row in that dance class, like that was like probably the highlight of my week. Or like if I was finally able to, you know, do a split, which I'd been working on for a while and a lot of people around me saw, like that was another big success. And a lot of these extracurriculars you get better at if you continue to practice
with
them
time.
time. So don't pause those, because like you don't like in years to come, that may be something that shaped you the most in your in your time growing up, and that's something you end up talking about in your applications.
I think one of the biggest mistakes that Indian parents make is that if my child is going to be doing anything extracurricular outside of education, they should either be the best at it or not to do it. Like if you're going to play tennis, you should become a professional tennis player. Or if you're going to play piano, you should be in some professional like ensemble.
Symphony.
Yeah, exactly. But the problem is that that's not always the most realistic expectation. The reason why we believe having these activities outside of just pure academics is that it just owes more to the story that we talked about earlier. Whether it's a story you're building for your business school application or even an undergrad, it makes you a much more well-rounded individual. Like me being good at chess or Sakhi good at Kathak, that's not the reason why universities will accept you. It's not that they're saying, oh, wow, they were very good at chess 10 years ago. They must be an exceptional human being now. That's not it. It just gives you another element by which to speak to your dimensions.
Yeah.
From the tangent of letting kids enjoy, हमारे पास एक बहुत interesting section होता है जिसमें हम
I was coming to her.
Yeah, हम लोग ना which we haven't mentioned in the questionnaire that we've sent to, but 3 questions which are absolutely unrelated, dumb, stupid questions that you can answer whatever way you guys want to. So और उस section की inauguration हमेशा आक्षी करती है for obvious reasons.
Okay. Did you guys have a Swades moment? Like when you landed for the first time after your admission to go to Wharton? क्या तुम ऐसे फ्लाइट से बाहर निकले और तुम्हारे पीछे वो K3G वाला वंदे मातरम बज रहा था?
I tell you, like Hrithik Roshan gets off in London and there's Vande, and you know he's doing Kathak, since you also Kathak in the middle of the street. ऐसा कुछ हुआ क्या कभी life?
Did you guys have that moment? Or is it
Yeah, मेरा experience interesting.
She did.
I left India. I had to fly to Philly. Beach में I had a stopover in London. London airport पे मैंने अपनी टांग तोड़ दी and सीधा hospital गई. 3 दिन London रुकी, वापस Philadelphia गई, like onboarding to Philadelphia, and spent my first semester with a broken leg. So there was not any Vande Mataram moment that time.
But when you got accepted, right?
I think definitely, like when you get that call of acceptance, that is like I remember I was with my mom and I was in the bathroom and a call came from like a Philly number and I didn't just take it. And my mom started to like shake her hands. And then like I basically called back on that number and I was like, I need to talk to whoever is calling me. I think the excitement level, the happiness level, it was like, you're on top of the world. So very Vande Mataram moment that was.
great?
I had a different response. I just really wanted to eat pasta at that point and then quit my job. And I think I did one of those.
सवाल number 2.
When I went to London for my undergrad, I think I definitely had a proper Swades moment. Like my parents dropped me and my mom saw the size of my room dorm and started crying कि तुम ऐसे इस जगह पे कैसे रहोगे? ये तो शुरू होता है, bathroom is like basically a small triangle where the toilet seat and the shower head is the same situation, right on top of each other.
Raja beta, मेरा कैसे?
Raja beta, basically.
I call it the Raja beta upbringing.
So
all
like,
have the Raja Beta upbringing.
I call it the Papa ki Pari. But the most important question to kind of bring this discussion together is, how much time is enough to get an authentic fake accent?
Yeah, Amit has grown up there. He's out of this question.
How long did it take you?
And how does it sound like?
I don't know what you're talking about.
So it only comes.
It's not, it doesn't exist for it doesn't. You cannot get it in a summer. We're going for summer school. So if that is very fake.
Would you be able to catch someone who has a summer school accent?
Sakhi has a summer school accent.
Nonsense.
Shiv, ladai mat karwao mere doston ke beech mein to.
So the topic. What was the topic, Akshi? Do we remember?
Videshi something.
विदेशी महाविद्यालयों में एडमिशन पाने के नुस्खे.
Okay, come back.
विदेशी महाविद्यालयों में एडमिशन पाने के नुस्खे.
Can you write it down?
नहीं, you say विदेशी
विदेशी महाविद्यालयों में admission पाने के नुस्खे.
Now say the whole thing.
I have a terrible memory for this.
Try 1 minute, guys.
विदेशी महाविद्यालयों में admission पाने के नुस्खे.
Close this discussion. Thank you guys
Thank you so much, guys, for being here.
It was
a part of this.
Fun.
Beautiful.
ठीक है, तो फिर सारे जो inbound payments आएंगी, all the tips that we've given, just forward it, huh?
We take 2%
2%
commission.
cut.
2% of all. Yeah.